It's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers on youth apprenticeships. First up is Taylor White. She's a senior advisor at New America on K-12 education and workforce issues and on the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which helps states and cities expand access to apprenticeships for high school-age youth. She's advised the Australian Embassy on education policy, written reports on teacher quality and competency-based education. She's held a Fulbright Fellowship, and she's going to give us some context on this subject at the very beginning. Ryan Gensler will follow her. He managed the startup of CareerWise Colorado, and he supported the launch of CareerWise programs in New York City and Indiana. He organized a delegation to learn about Switzerland's vocational employment and training system. He developed workforce programs for advanced manufacturers across Colorado, raised over $4 million to upskill retail workers in Colorado, and developed a 20-state network focused on skills in the digital economy. He'll help us understand the CareerWise model, how CareerWise operates in Colorado and the replication sites, and the results and outcomes. Wendy Myers-Cambor is a managing director in human resources and North America head of future talent with Accenture in New York City. She will describe Accenture's experience with apprenticeships and her experience with CareerWise in New York City. She'll then moderate questions for the three speakers. Taylor, we look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Keith. And before I get started, thank you to you and to Nathaniel and to the bank for hosting me in this conversation. Really important for the region and for the nation. I come from New, it's pressed. It's green, thank you, Bob. All right, so can people hear me? That indicates you can't, but okay. I'll move it closer, here we go. Better? Okay, so I come to you today from New America in Washington, D.C. We are a nonpartisan think and action tank dedicated to public problem solving. We do this across a number of areas. I sit within our education policy program and work across our pre-K-12 and workforce development teams, also known as the Center for Education and Skills at New America. Some of you, I know, have interacted with us in various capacities before. Near and dear to our heart, and I say our heart because I sit across, well, it's both mine, but also the two teams I sit on, is trying to find ways to better connect academic and technical education, and also understanding the impact that emerging technologies have on the future workforce. And so where I sit, I think those of you who were asking questions in the last session provided a really nice segue. I sit and do a lot of work for our Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is an initiative run by New America, but in concert with a number of national partners, one of whom is CareerWise Colorado, one of our leading practitioner partners in this initiative. So before I tell you a little bit about this initiative, my job here is to provide a little bit of national context for the conversation around youth apprenticeship. I will say that what led us to launch this initiative was an increasing sense that the kind of reliable link that many folks in the room expected to find between education and economic mobility has grown really fragile for a lot of people in this country. Too many high school students in places like Philadelphia and throughout this region lack affordable options for higher education and career preparation. High school graduation rates are at an all-time high, and you'll constantly see headlines about that in the newspaper. Yesterday, National Student Clearinghouse came out with new data about completion rates at 4- and 2-year colleges on the rise. But the truth is that youth today are entering the labor market more slowly. They're having a hard time getting a foot in the door in jobs that provide family-sustaining wages and careers, frankly. They can find jobs, but it's very difficult to launch careers. And costs remain a huge impediment to 4-year degrees. Though the wage premium still exists for a bachelor's degree, it's very hard for students to get through those, out of those, without insurmountable amounts of debt that make it very difficult for them to launch adult lives. So we know all of this is happening at the same time that employers are struggling to find the talent they are looking for and to build and to sort of reach into new pools of talent for themselves across a number of sectors. So we view youth apprenticeship as a strategy to address both of these challenges simultaneously. It's a way to connect the sort of learning and career aspirations of young people with the talent needs and evolving talent needs, frankly, of a number of industries across the U.S. For students, and I realize this is a room of folks who know a bit about apprenticeship, but I want to make sure that you understand the distinction between apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship. We've had pre-apprenticeship thrown out. There are lots of different terminology, or lots of different terms that are used. But when we talk about what a student gets from youth apprenticeship, they finish a youth apprenticeship with a high school diploma, paid work experience, mentorship, and a network that many students just don't have an opportunity to gain. And they leave with credentials and college credit. This is key to PIA's definition, the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeships definition of youth apprenticeship, and can be a distinction between the youth model and adult models. For us, we feel it's critically important that students who move through these programs have an opportunity to earn post-secondary credits through them. It helps expand students' options at the point of completion. They can continue on to earn associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees and beyond, if they so choose. They can also just enter and go right into work or do both in tandem. And really one of the value adds of these models, and we can get into some of the kind of like financing complications and things like that, but one of the real value adds of an apprenticeship model for youth over an internship model or a pre-apprenticeship model are those credits, are those paid hours, and the mentorship networks. It's a longer term sustained opportunity for young people. I will say what launched our decision to stand up the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship was our sense that there's a lot of activity and interest in this model, but it was a disparate, sort of disorganized, disconnected field. Those of you who have studied youth apprenticeship for a long time know that there are kind of well, I shouldn't say that. There's only a handful of you in this room who have studied it for a long time. But anyone who's been on the lookout for it has seen that there are clusters of youth apprentices in states like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia that are kind of hangovers from the school-to-work movement from the 90s. We see a lot of growth in places like Colorado and New York, which we'll hear about shortly. But in order to make that, to launch that growth, a lot has to happen. These things can't just sort of spring up millions of programs across the U.S. So there's a lot of conversation to be had up here today about how we're building these programs and the sort of systems that need to support them. I will say just very quickly about the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. We launched in 2018. Again, I said it's a multi-partner initiative. It's also a multi-year initiative. Our goal is to provide support to cities and states that are looking to grow youth apprenticeship, not just financial support through grants, which we have provided, but also we've been engaged in a significant research and communications effort to tell the story of youth apprentices and to better understand the strategies and conditions that really make these programs and systems thrive at both the local, regional, and state level. I will say just a couple of things that we've learned through this initiative thus far. We have been very surprised just by the broad interest in this topic. Clearly the questions today demonstrate that and validate our sense that this is of interest. When we opened up a grant competition last year to the field just to say who is interested in getting some support from us to launch or grow these programs, we expected about 40 applications. We received over 220 applications from 49 states and Puerto Rico to launch these programs, which blew us away, both just sort of the numbers, but also the breadth and depth of expertise in the field and the depth of the interest. I will say from that pool, we selected 9 sites that we've been providing grant funding and technical support to over the last year and change. We also stood up a network of about 45 other communities that are doing this work and would like to remain connected to us and to one another. We have seen enormous potential and growth in non-traditional industries, financial services, IT, healthcare, public sector apprenticeships, a number of things that have already been mentioned today. I will reinforce a comment earlier. We are data poor. Right, it's hard to find these kids even in the states that have systems that are moving something like 4,000 kids a year enrolled in apprenticeships. It's very hard to find them in data. They're often in Rapids as registered apprentices, but it can be difficult to identify how old they are, where they've gone, how they got there. So there's a lot of work that we can do to collect better data on these students. Equity as a design principle is hugely important to us and to the field. If youth apprenticeship is really going to be a strategy to provide opportunities for local and regional economies to provide more equitable opportunity for students. These programs must be designed with equity as a goal, not an afterthought. And finally, what I'll say, well, I'm sure I'm over time as always, but before I pass it over to Ryan, I will say one of the biggest things that we've learned thus far in working with these 9 sites and the broader network and through some research colleagues have done is that partnership is really hard. And some of the conversation today has been around this group sponsorship model. I will say that youth apprenticeship is unique for many of the reasons folks have kind of been skating around today. It requires collaboration between a K-12 system, a post-secondary system, employers, and in many communities, a number of support services organizations and NGOs that really make students, are really crucial to helping students get to and through whatever their life might be or opportunities might be after high school. That can be moving those people in concert with one another. I think a commissioner from New Jersey said earlier, talking from the same playbook. Those are people who don't even know each other, has never even seen each other's playbook, right? I mean, we have struggled for a long time to get K-12 and higher ed to work together, and then you throw employers in the mix and the workforce system in the mix. It takes an awful lot of work to get people reading from the same playbook. I will say there are also folks in that triangle who are not always accustomed to letting anyone else lead, and these models really must be employer-driven. Education has a hard time with that, right? And there are good reasons, particularly in working with young people, that education might feel anxious about having employers lead. Part of the PIA initiative, in addition to releasing this, our definition of youth apprenticeship has also been to release some quality principles, which normally I would put up on a slide and walk you through in great detail. But one of the core principles there, or I should say all of them, are really designed to help the different stakeholders that need to come together for these initiatives understand what their role might be and understand sort of how they need to have a common vision for the work, and each of them has something to contribute to it. So on the employer K-12 higher ed front, the principle of adaptability is crucially important. These programs need to be equipping students with skills that allow them to succeed in an industry, but also to move across that industry to different employers over the course of what we hope will be very, very long and successful careers. So I would encourage anyone who's curious about that to take a look at the principles. I am more than happy to send them to you, and you can send them all over the place. But the last thing that I will say, I'll probably refer you to our principles and definition about 6 times over the rest of this panel. But the last thing that I will say is that the capacity to coordinate those different players is crucially important. Intermediaries, the importance of intermediaries, particularly in the youth space, cannot be overstated. There are a number of reasons for that, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that, but I will say that lots of different organizations can be intermediaries. We're about to hear from one of the very best, CareerWise Colorado, CareerWise working to develop intermediary capacity in a number of other cities, but there are a lot of different ways that these intermediaries can form. It can be run by an LEA, a community college, a chamber of commerce, an industry association, and we've seen lots of different models be successful. And so I'm very happy to talk to folks more about that or share information with you. But what I will say, just in closing, is that right now we think there are somewhere between 10 and 20,000 youth apprentices in the U.S. For many of the reasons that you've heard already today and that I'm sure will come out on this panel, we think that there is huge potential for there to be far, far more than that, not only because the demand is there, but the need is as well. And we've heard a lot about students' learning needs and the need to connect them with the world they are about to enter. That's not something our K-12 system has traditionally been set up to do very well. But we are running out of time to find better ways to do it, and we genuinely think that youth apprenticeship is a pathway forward, both for youth, for both K-12 and higher education, and particularly for industry and the workforce system. So thank you for that, and I'm excited to hand things over to Ryan Gensler, who can really talk about what it has taken to build that intermediary capacity and the various roles that leading intermediary organizations can play.
Yes, thank you, Taylor. Can you all hear me? Good, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Thank you to the Federal Reserve for hosting this, Keith for bringing us on for this, and Teresa and Nathaniel for coordinating. I'm excited to be on this panel here with Taylor, who's really been doing this amazing sweep of the country around best practices and amassing those and creating frameworks, because there is such a deficiency in kind of understanding what a real working model is for youth apprenticeship and how systems can work together in supporting that. And then Wendy, who's exemplary model at Accenture, is actually putting that to practice from an employer perspective, and in an industry that we don't think of as apprenticeable, and much less for youth, for K-12 coming in. So very exciting. As mentioned earlier, I'm Ryan Gensler. I'm our Director of National Partnerships at CareerWise Colorado. Before that, I worked with a manufacturer in Denver, Colorado called Intertech Plastics. Our CEO of Intertech is also the CEO of CareerWise. He started his manufacturing firm while he was in college and actually dropped out, so he doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And in the 30-odd years he's been in existence as an employer, his biggest challenge has been talent. And through his community engagement efforts, through his work with Denver Public Schools and the local education system, he's tried to build those pathways and build that engagement with the local community around him so that his company would survive through the good times and the bad in our economy, and be able to grow and adapt. And when he started finally working with Governor Hickenlooper on this a little bit more specifically about 5-6 years ago, he realized, and Governor Hickenlooper pointed out, that this isn't a manufacturing problem, that this is actually an economy-wide problem, that we're struggling finding the right skills for our young people, matching them to the right jobs and occupations, and having clear pathways that are not linear and don't have dead ends. So that took him to Switzerland. He saw that 70% of young people were choosing an apprenticeship, that it resulted in something that was equally rigorous and equally valued as a higher education degree, that it led to other opportunities for higher education within the apprenticeship pathway, if you will, and the dual education system that they have. And it also led to a 10% ROI on every apprentice trained for the businesses. Businesses were paying 60% of the total vocational education system in Switzerland, and they profited off of it. And that sustains the system in a way that no program has done here. So that's what our mission is. That's what we're trying to build. I'll walk through that a little bit more. Maybe. This one. Here we go. So when Governor Hickenlooper said that this was an economy-wide challenge, we also realized that the talent pipeline was quite leaky, that we were hemorrhaging talent. And in Colorado, this comes from the Talent Colorado Pipeline Report. We were able to actually pull this out for the US, although it sounds like it might be slightly different based on new data that was just released yesterday. But at the end of the day, it doesn't get that much better. We have a terrible leaky pipeline, and where 100 students in this country start high school, only about a quarter of those are actually going to receive a post-secondary degree, and 150% of the time it takes to do it. And they're going to have to pay a lot to get that done. They don't have the relevance to actually understand why they're on this path, and the path only supports one type of learner traditionally. We're hearing a lot of great things coming out of New Jersey and others around really innovative ways to start blending work-based learning and start adding more relevance to this. But this is a challenge, and this is a system that really, for employers, gives them the most homogenous type of person to recruit from. So if you're trying to diversify your workforce, you're pulling from the smallest segment of the country. You're also giving students this message that says the only way to success is the most expensive and least probable that you'll succeed, the riskiest path. That doesn't work in this country, and we can't let that be the persisting message. We have to fill in a path for all, and that's where youth apprenticeship really comes in. That's why it's so important that we not focus only on college apprenticeship or adult apprenticeship, but we focus on K-12 apprenticeship as a pathway to and through post-secondary into these careers. With low unemployment, with huge amounts of vacant jobs, money left on the table from companies not able to grow because they can't find that talent, and the fact that we've got $1.3 trillion in college debt, we've got a real problem in this economy, and employers are bearing the brunt of that, and educators are being blamed for it. That doesn't work either. There's a recipe where they work together, where we work together, to actually solve for this problem here. An apprenticeship is that vehicle, and this is our necessity in our country in order to stay globally competitive, to stay on the cutting edge of innovation, and bring in diverse young perspectives into our employers, into our firms. And I said, education bears the brunt of this. They get blamed for this. Education has been taking on about 100% of our workforce development and education system. And oftentimes when employers are involved, it's pointing a finger. It's maybe being critical. saying, I'm not getting the skills that I need, what are you doing? That's not physically possible with how fast the world of work is changing for education to actually keep up. The investment is insane, and we don't put enough money in our school systems in the first place. So how are they going to keep up with the training of the technical skills and the soft skills that are needed in the job if they're doing it all on their own? Youth apprenticeship adds that third leg to the stool that helps prop all of this up, where industry is actually connected to the K-12 and post-secondary system in a meaningful way. So education gets the real-time feedback loop of what's needed to be taught and trained, and business is actually contributing to that training process, not just advising curriculum that's then taught in a classroom or a simulated environment, but actually taking on training themselves, doing some of that work in a real-world environment where the stakes are real and students aren't going to be slapped on the wrist for showing up late. You get fired eventually. That's a real lesson. You can't learn that in the classroom. We actually surveyed a bunch of companies in Colorado to better understand where they think the most essential skills need to be taught and learned. And actually, Ryu mentioned all of the essential skills that are most commonly requested for in job descriptions earlier in the presentation. And if you look at where they said the ideal place to learn these things are, the majority of the most essential skills that they have are learned on the job. Advanced math, communications were the two that needed to be done in the classroom. But I will say none of these can be done one or the other. It's a pairing, right? Students don't understand that they're learning soft skills and what that means if they're not actually taught what that fundamentally actually is in the classroom first. And communication can be learned in the classroom, but unless it's applied, it isn't really mastered. These two things have to go hand in hand. But this is telling us that business actually agrees that they need to have a real hand in the training and open up their doors to actually create an environment for these young people to learn. So we took all this information and we thought about how we do this in Colorado. Governor Hickenlooper was really excited about this concept, so he created the Business Experiential Learning Commission. He brought the executive directors of our relevant talent agencies together with the CEOs of relevant industries in our economy to sit at a table and focus specifically on work-based learning strategies as a state. What are we going to do to better embed all of our systems together in a strategic way to build this up? What they decided to do is focus on something to start, because work-based learning has a whole continuum and it's all critical. But where do we have the biggest bang for the buck? Where are we going to start? And youth apprenticeship was deemed as the most lacking in our state, the thing that systems don't naturally provide for, because we have age restrictions on some sides of funding, we've got course restrictions on the training side. None of it's talking together. So they focused on youth apprenticeship to really train and drive that. But when they really got down to it, they realized exactly what Taylor was mentioning before, that without an intermediary that can keep up with business, that can translate between the systems, so that we're not talking about skills and then credits in the same conversation as like things, we needed to create an intermediary. And that's where CareerWise was really born. That's where we created this 501c3 called CareerWise Colorado to be that convener of the stakeholders, to translate between business and education, to help K-12 understand how they can let loose a little bit and let students out of the classroom to learn and get some credit for that. And how higher ed can start offering courses that maybe used to require certain prerequisites that weren't actually necessary for the job, and they can offer those a little bit more up front. Maybe we can stop having our accounting apprentices take astronomy classes that they have to pay for. We're working on that. But that intermediary function is critical to keep all of these players working together. It also is critical to provide some of those supports that Taylor mentioned, especially when you're looking at young populations who are not used to having a lot of workforce embedded experiences and are not used to working in communities or areas that they're with employers who are not used to a diverse population. So we provide supports like boot camps and training for our apprentices. We actually train our supervisors who push back at first because they think they've been managing for a long time and they think they know what they're doing, but they're not training companies. They're not used to providing these skill set training opportunities and training to specific competencies that are identified in advance. And they don't understand growth mindset and what it means to be working with a 16, 17, 18-year-old person that doesn't come from the same place that they came from. So we do that kind of training up front and ongoing, and we provide case management along the entire way. That sounds like a lot to provide, and it is. And it's not intended to be the only way this happens. But this is how we have to create the proof points for something that is so new in Colorado and start sharing how we actually get this to advance more broadly. And eventually, the systems take on more of this work themselves, and this becomes the way this actually works. Here's roughly how this works. General model. It's competency-based, but we use time frameworks to just give a sense of how long this actually takes. Our apprenticeships are all competency-based. Year one is junior year of high school, 3 days a week in the classroom, about 2 days a week in the workplace. That shifts, could be all afternoons, could be all mornings, could be A/B days. It depends on the school district, it depends on the business needs. Year two is their senior year and they're starting to take less classes, more work, and year three is post-secondary. They're taking more college classes, they're working almost full-time, and finishing out that apprenticeship. Throughout the whole time, they're taking technical related instruction courses, either through a community college, a university, or we get scrappy. Sometimes they're taking Udacity courses or LinkedIn Learning, whatever we can do to find them the relevant training for the skills that they're missing and help them be productive on the job. Because all of this has to be productive. Bob mentioned that. If this isn't productive, there's no ROI for business, they will not continue doing this, and our students miss out, and we continue having this talent leakage. After the apprenticeship is a renegotiation in our world. This is a little bit different than where a lot of other traditional adult apprenticeships sit. But in our world, there's a renegotiation where they hire full-time, they work part-time while pursuing higher education and continuing for that bachelor's degree or master's degree or whatever they're going to pursue. Or they decide, you know what, this was amazing, I've gained a lot of skills, I want to apply this in a new industry, in a new occupation, or in a new division, and they go on somewhere else. But the business has earned their positive return through the productive training, so it's okay. In Switzerland, they only retain 40% of the apprentices that they actually train. They want them to go back out into that workforce, gain new skills, gain new perspectives, and potentially come back to them later. But at the very least, there's a more skilled economy for their company to thrive in. That's essential. So in the first 3 years, I forgot to mention that. We're only 3 years into this. It's a 3-year apprenticeship. So, and I know Keith's really hoping for a lot of rigorous outcome data. But that's a long ways off.
But how many years does it feel like? It's a heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift. So in Colorado alone, we've hired 418 apprentices across 132 employers, across 6 pathways and about 15 occupations. These are all high school apprentices being hired at age 16 or 17 years old. 77 participating schools, that's a broad sense, that's districts, and they're providing work-based learning opportunities and access to an open competitive marketplace for these apprentices. So we've created a technology backbone that allows these apprentices to apply to specific high school apprenticeship pathways or job descriptions by our employers. The employers then interview the students and hire from that. So a lot of schools, we're not deep in them yet. That's kind of the next step. And then a lot of higher education partners. We have a range of employers across a variety of occupations. You'll notice there's not a lot of trades types organizations on here. We have not done this in the trades because there's an existing strong registered apprenticeship model for trades occupations. And there's a lot of training provided by unions and other shops that are high quality and rigorous, and we don't need to recreate the wheel. So what we're really focused on is new industries and knowledge-based economy, looking at financial services, tech. We're getting into healthcare, we're doing advanced manufacturing, really focusing on automation technology and quality assurance aspects. And we're looking at this from a large and small employer perspective. So we have Fortune 500 global tech firms on here, and we have 10-person little office shops on the western slope of Colorado where they can't figure out how to keep people living in their town until they have this youth apprenticeship. The benefits are pretty obvious, but I'll point out 2 different things, one on each side. For the business, one of the things that we didn't expect and that they didn't expect is actually having this new cultural shift that a lot of human resources professionals are really trying to figure out how to do in their business, but they're engaging incumbent workers in a way that they did not know would happen because they get so excited when these young people come in. And when these kind of disengaged, checked out, later in their career employees, especially in like an insurance firm maybe, if there's any insurers in here, we can talk. It's a less engaging environment. But you bring in 16, 17, 18-year-olds and it changes the dynamic, changes the culture of the entire organization, which has been pretty powerful, and it re-engages them. And on the youth side, of course, they get the skills, they get college credit, they get money, like all of that is great, of course, right? But they also get a professional network, and that access is critical. That's one of the number one things that prevent someone from really accessing that upward mobility that they desire for. Even if they have the education, even if they have the skills, unless they have a network, they're not going anywhere, and this provides that. Again, as I mentioned, we've had to create a technology backbone that actually connects all of this work from an intermediary perspective. So from the employer access point to schools having a designated approver model where they're able to approve access into the open marketplace where their apprentices are applying, to communications and really changing perceptions through a strong communication strategy that all can flow through our platform that we've created, and also from the competency assessment side. Every 6 months through our app, our supervisors and our apprentices, our supervisors assess and our apprentices self-assess their progress along a rubric for their competencies, both the soft skills and the technical skills by occupation. And we can compare that every 6 months and see how they're doing as a cohort and see how they're doing individually within their businesses and compare that and see what related instruction is missing. Gives us a real-time feedback loop. And again, if this was just in Colorado, it doesn't really do much for our businesses who have a national presence, for our students who have to or choose to move. We have to have something that provides mobility. So we've been working with communities across the country to share what we've learned, learn from each other, because we don't know it all. There's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot of really great experts out there. We've partnered with nonprofits in New York, Here to Here, in Northern Indiana, with Horizon Education Alliance, and in DC with CityBridge to launch partner models where they've licensed out the technology platform and are using the same competency sets. So the banks in New York City are using the same competency sets as the banks in Colorado and training to the same standard. So our apprentices have mobility and currency as we start to build this up. We're starting to work with a lot more communities on a more technical assistance providing model as opposed to just a licensing. I'll end, I think, with the fact that we have got to create a dual education system in this country. Apprenticeship as a program is not enough, but if it taps into a full system where there's a work-based learning continuum and where there's lifelong learning opportunity, we remove the dead ends that exist in our system today. We create mobility for our students and allow for all types of learners to have a path out of wherever their circumstances is and to wherever they want to go. And that's me. I'm very happy to pass it along to Wendy, who can talk about this from the employer perspective, which is the most important part, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan and Taylor as well, and to all of you for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, a beautiful slide. Thank you for having me here today, and it really is a privilege to be able to talk about what we at Accenture feel is a critical topic as we think about the future of work and as we think about the talent landscape of the future, and this being the critical intersection of those two. For those of you who may not know, Accenture is a global services firm specializing in consulting, technology, operations, and digital transformation. We have about 505,000 employees in 130 countries. Today I'll be focusing on our work in the United States, which is about 50,000 employees across the country. And as Keith said, I specialize in looking after our future talent, which looks at new models and pools of talent that we can bring to bear to really enhance not only our workforce, but to address what we feel is the future, because we are innovators at our heart. And as a technology advances our world, we know that it's putting millions of workers at risk of being left behind. We talked earlier about unemployment being at an all-time low, but income equality is at its highest level in 50 years and growing. So, we as an organization are committed to making a difference in the way that people work and live, and to really helping people to skill and upskill and reskill the workforce, understanding that skills scarcity is keeping millions of Americans in low skill, low wage jobs, or keeping them out of the workforce. And we really feel that apprenticeship programs are a huge part of that solution. Specifically, as Ryan was saying, we know that there's a skills gap facing, almost every company as, technology is displacing things and changing the way that roles and jobs and careers look and will look in the future. So that apprenticeship programs present not only a unique opportunity to look at new pools of talent, but also address that skills gap, create new career pathways, and engage non-traditional hires who may have been, overlooked in the past, and on the other side of the opportunity divide, if you will, and historically underrepresented in the leadership pool, and really reskill and address those jobs that may have been or will be disrupted by technology. So just a little bit about apprenticeship programs at Accenture in general, then a little bit about the youth apprenticeship model, which really is, on the surface, very similar to other apprenticeship models, but once you click down, very, very different. And that's what we all want to talk about today. So I would say, formally launched our apprenticeship program in the United States in 2016. In that time, we've trained and employed 450 apprenticeships in 20 key cities in the United States. The vast majority of those, by the way, have completed the program successfully and been converted into full-time in-demand roles in our organization in some high-demand technology roles such as cybersecurity, application development, software engineering, cloud computing. Some of them work in-house in things like supporting IT development on the floor. Some of them work in our delivery centers on more customer service focused, more traditional kind of apprentice roles. And most recently with CareerWise, we had the high school age apprentices, and I'll tell you, anybody who is the parent of teenagers, as much as it's challenging to employ millennial college graduates, it's uniquely challenging to employ teenagers. And, so we had our inaugural 20-person CareerWise apprenticeship cohort in New York City, and we chose not to put them in client-facing roles in year one. So that cohort, unlike our historical apprentices around the country, instead of being technology trained or consulting, client-facing trained, are in roles like human resources and other more internal-facing roles, which is exciting and interesting and very successful, but again, very different. I'll mention that we team very closely with our skilling partners, and that includes, CareerWise in the high school case. We have community college relationships, not-for-profits, technology training academies, and, for the skilling and recruitment and onboarding, we do find that having key relationships really facilitates that first step of the process. And we really want to take this big. We want to, build on what we have learned and where we have been successful, not just within our own, sizable and complex and growing organization, but within the country and within the world. And I think it was Taylor's point, that really happens through collaboration. In 2016 in Chicago, along with Aon, we co-founded the Chicago Apprentice Network, in which we convened companies formally to help advance professional apprenticeship programs. So we immediately got about 30 companies, Walgreens, JP Morgan Chase, McDonald's, et cetera, and we're able to, in the inaugural year, have 600 apprenticeships in Chicago. And really, if you think about it, we talk about words like resources and apprentices and FTEs, but what that really is, that's 600 people in the inaugural year and their families who I can honestly say their lives have been changed forever. We hire, Trish, 10,000 people in the United States through our typical channels every year, right? Top universities, computer science and other degrees, and they go straight into our training program, and we give them their laptop on the first day, and they sort of look down at the laptop bag, and they don't like the city they've been assigned to, that they get to an all-expense trip every week. When we gave the laptops to our first cohort of apprentices, one of them cried and said, "Is it okay if I take it home?" Right? I mean, we're dealing with such a tremendous, bridge into a community of people who would probably not have this opportunity. And not only to give them that leg up, but for us who pride ourselves on being and selling to our clients experts in innovation, I would ask, how can we do that without true diversity around the table? And not just gender diversity and ethnic diversity, but young people versus older people, and people who have had experiences in their lives, who have truly demonstrated grit, who have gotten themselves to these programs, who bring experiences to bear, who bring insight and experience to our user interface design, or to our thinking about how people work and live and use the systems we design. I really feel like it's the ultimate win-win in terms of how that type of diversity makes us stronger and more innovative as a business, and thus delivering not only an important impact to the communities from which we draw this talent and the organizations with whom we partner to, work on these programs, but really to have impact to our own organization and to our clients. So we don't just work on our own, apprenticeship programs and models like the one I mentioned with Aon. We actually wrote with the Business Roundtable Workforce Partnership Initiative and the Chicago Apprentice Network a playbook, right? Because there's just a lot of work that goes into it. It's similar to, but not at all like anything else you've ever done. So you can find it on our website, right? Bridging the gap between talent and opportunity. We want everyone to be successful, right? And, helping others to jumpstart their programs, as Taylor said, or Ryan, not just for a job, but for a career, is part of our view of the workforce of the future and the role that apprentice programs play in that. Let me tell you a little bit about CareerWise. You know, we've had a pretty good run of doing things the way we do it. We're, you know, a process systems organization. You know, we hire a certain way and we have a good formula for things. And, you know, then we said, let's try this, let's try hiring these kids, right? And they really are kids, right? We have a 14-year-old, I think. I think we have one 14-year-old. We have some young ones, right?
That was not Section 5.
And it is, we're not doing anything illegal, right? Trish, do we have a 14-year-old?
We had a 15-year-old and they turned 16.
Okay. Okay, for the record. For the record. Anyway, you know, we, our first cohort, as I mentioned, is 20 apprentices. And did they start in September? And we really had to figure out everything together, right? And how would, and they're from a variety of schools, right? And in Colorado, you just pulled up the bus to the school and you drove them to the workplace. That doesn't work in the 5 boroughs of New York, right? You know, it's funny, the devil's in the details, right? So we had to figure things out with the Department of Labor and the Department of Ed and our own internal, you know, organization, and how were we going to create roles for them that were beneficial to them? How are we going to create the training? And, you know, but at the end of the day, like Ryan said, the surprise benefits of having young, vibrant, enthusiastic learners and contributors, sometimes with little filter, you know, in your meetings, on your floor, is a pretty exciting addition to the work we do. You know, and as I said, it doesn't come for free, you know, literally or figuratively. You know, but I think it is not only an opportunity for companies like ours, but as we take into account the workforce of the future and the changing composition, and as we take into account automation, it's not only an opportunity, but it really is an imperative, and that companies must work together and work with the organizations and government agencies who have been represented here today to really be creative and to be collaborative and to be committed boldly to change the way we think about talent and to make apprenticeship a priority. So with that, let me turn the floor over. I'm getting a sign from this lovely gentleman in front that we have about 5 minutes for questions. And you know, I would like to just say a little bit about I'm from New York, if you hadn't noticed. But, you know, when we think about Philadelphia, I really think it's a timely and incredibly relevant topic for this Philadelphia and its environs. You know, there's a deep and broad pool of talent here, unlike any other city. You're not dominated by a single industry, which I think is so exciting. You have dozens of incredible universities within an hour. You know, but historically, you're this large metro city with a high rate of poverty. And, you know, in essence, and I don't want to, you know, get into the unemployment statistics that Rio was so good at earlier, but I think it's safe to say you are, or you're a danger of becoming sort of an exporter of talent. And, you know, my understanding is that's why the Amazon, you know, deal didn't come through. But I don't know that the Amazon deal was the answer. You know, I don't know that Big Bang is, you know, sort of the answer to employment. I was on the train down today, I was reading a Brookings Institute article published in the Harvard Business Review, sort of talking about Philadelphia, and the job growth comes from empowering existing people and businesses in a community to grow, innovate, and start new ventures. You know, so as we open it up to questions, I'd say when we think about, you know, this Philly area, you know, and apprenticeship, and what makes Philly unique, I think the talent's out there. There's tremendously hardworking people who can commute, who can be reskilled. You know, how can we work together to, you know, create new opportunities and have a real impact on this area? Yes.
Yeah, hi. So with respect to youth apprenticeships, you know, my career, as I'm sure a lot of folks in this room can share, has been a patchwork quilt of experiences, which I've crossed industries, have built different skills and whatnot. And so as you think about building career pathways for young people, when our careers have been, who may have been, in fact, quite unorthodox to arrive at the place we're at, how do you then sort of have those conversations with young people in an apprenticeship model where the career pathway is sort of in front of them, and how do you then talk about like self-efficacy in terms of navigating their employment landscape and fulfilling their own sorts of goals and aspirations?
Is this a Taylor answer? I think we could all answer it.
Yeah.
You want to give it a shot?
Sure.
Or do you, Ryan?
Doesn't matter.
So I'm happy to answer it as from just sort of the general model perspective, and then it'd be interesting to hear from folks who are interfacing with students every day, how they navigate these conversations. When we think about youth apprenticeship, and I made the comment earlier, we think very much about it as an opportunity to launch a student into a career, not necessarily a job. I would not say, and I'm going to guess that folks on either side of me might disagree a little bit, but that career is not necessarily at that employer, in that industry, in that exact occupational sort of descriptor, right? That the idea is that students are gaining the skills, the networks, the sort of familiarity with workplace mores that many people in this room just sort of take for granted. And that by acquiring those skills and having a structured route to do that, earning some credits along the way, they will be better positioned to navigate the world of work in whatever direction they decide to choose, right? The idea is not that if you were an apprentice, a youth apprentice in a financial services type role, that you've got to work in that field for the rest of your life. The very strongest programs that we see provide students an opportunity to see what other jobs at those firms look like, to, in some cases, try on for short periods of time different hats within a firm to understand if, they have, they're learning an IT type skill, their occupation is in IT, but they're going to sit within the pure IT department. They're going to sit within the sort of customer support department and play that role. They might work with the sort of accounting division with their IT skills, just to see the different areas where their skills can be applied within a large firm. In terms of advocating for yourself as an employer, which may be or an employee rather, which may be part of your question as well, I think the folks that operate and sort of coordinate these programs, and that includes sort of the intermediary role, but also the educators and employers who are involved, do have a role to play in ensuring that students understand how to advocate for themselves as employees. And that is training that needs to be built into the model, both directly to the students, but also to the frontline supervisors and mentors that are helping those students sort of exist in these companies. So it's certainly something we talk about, think about, feel is very important. I can't tell you that every single program I've ever sat in does that well, but it's certainly in part of our definition and principles for youth apprenticeship. A piece of it is ensuring that these roles are career-oriented, but not sort of just for the career or occupation where a student starts, that these are opportunities that orient students towards successful life in the workplace, broadly defined.
I'll follow up on Taylor's point and say I 100% agree. Yes. And that may be because, I represent a company that is constantly evolving and, is innovation focused, and any of us, apprentice or, traditional employee, is only successful in our ability to constantly learn. We have over $1 billion budget in learning every year, and try new things and do new things that contribute to the overall value of the firm. You know, it's interesting, when I grew up, right, you pretty much had one path. You went to school, maybe you went to college, maybe you went to grad school. That part of your life ended, and then you worked. That's just not how it is anymore. And I think that the millennial and post-millennial workforce understands and knows that, and that's where their expectation lies. And certainly that's where the tech firms and firms that are starting up now and that are more agile are orienting how they run their business, how they provide learning for their people, and even how they create or don't create organizational structures for their people. So, you know, when you describe you know, I forget your words, but you had different roles and you learned different things and you were able to, you know, not sort of follow a straight path. I think what you described will be the norm, and we must all always be learning. And in our apprenticeship program, that's what we focus on. In Ryan's diagram, it was those skills that are completely universal and critical and transferable, which happen to line up with the skills that are needed in when you look at the tech trends for the future. People shouldn't be majoring in computer science. They need empathy, they need communication, they need collaboration, they need negotiation, they need critical thinking. And the experiences that we are providing through our apprenticeship program, through their cohort, through their work with their mentors and sponsors, through their exposure to senior management, are providing all of those skills as part of the learning aspect of the apprenticeship.
So, Wendy, a wonderful story and wonderfully told. I'm only slightly reluctant to ask your colleagues about the major challenges. What we're finding in New Jersey through the research that we're doing at the Employers Association is a lot of what we've heard, a lot of talk about not finding the right skills. 70% will say that talent gap is impacting the business, as what we've seen through the presentations. And then we ask, well, do you have a talent management strategy? And 70% will say no. So there's a lot of complaining, but not a lot being done. So then we said, well, what's the impediments? We asked the HR people, what's the impediments? Generally speaking, it's not a priority. No time, no money. Owners just don't. The rest of the world is not Accenture. So the questions for Ryan, the basic question for Ryan and Taylor then, is what are you doing on the demand side, right? What are you doing on inculcating this strategic thinking on behalf of the folks who are doing the hiring?
It's an excellent question.
It's a really good question. And I think the challenges are vast, right? But one of our approaches is to partner with existing organizations and entities that have businesses' ear and businesses' trust through associations, through chambers, SHRM, for example, on the HR side specifically, and working with them and thinking about this as a true talent strategy, not just a program to buy into. And the most dangerous thing you can do is to start by approaching this from a philanthropic standpoint when you're talking about K-12, because then it's automatically CSR. It's a precarious budget. It's based on a relationship, and it doesn't actually become embedded in how the culture of the organization facilitates learning and training. And so we do not, as a principle, talk to CSR in our first conversations. We talk to HR directly. And that's our strategy in engaging businesses in a different way than they're used to being engaged, especially on the K-12 side. That's a tough sell no matter what, though. And I think one of the things that we need more of is success stories and businesses preaching this, the Wendy's and the small businesses saying, we can do this, it's happening, and we're seeing success.
And you'll be left behind if, future talent, as I call it, right, which includes apprenticeship, is not part of your talent strategy. I speak for Accenture when I say we're a talent-led business. People is all we have. We don't have factories and we don't have products, et cetera. So for us, being innovative about our people is fundamental to how we run our business. It's interesting, as I look at the slide they've created for me today about apprentices, in the middle is our global CEO, and all the way to the right is our North America CEO, surrounded by apprentices, right? That, I think, is a very visual representation of how important this is to us for our strategy. So to your point, how to figure out how to appeal to your particular leadership, can be a challenge. And I do think, to Ryan's point, creating cohorts and, my CEO, along with Jamie Dimon, who I was with yesterday, we're just wanting to create a movement and not take no for an answer in, proselytizing how important we feel apprenticeship and, bridging the gap between talent and opportunity to provide benefit to our own companies, to these communities, and to these individuals, is important to our country.
One thing that I'll just add, I think Ryan's point about CareerWise being really focused on talking to HR and sort of leadership rather than CSR is an important point, especially for companies that have CSR. For the many, many SMEs that I think you're referring to that are like 5 or 6 people shops that can't necessarily be single employer sponsors, the sort of group sponsorship model I think is hugely important. So just as a data point of interest to you, the state of Wisconsin has something like 3,000, I think it's almost 4,000 youth apprentices. They have about 2,000 businesses that employ these students, right? So the ratio there suggests that many of these are small, medium employers. What makes that possible in a place like Wisconsin is that they have a number of entities, consortia around the state that are providing infrastructure into which those employers can essentially plug in, right? So these employers aren't asked to recreate the wheel every time they want to participate. They know who to go to in the region to find the students. They know what the training those students might receive through a youth apprenticeship model would look like. There's a state entity that's providing coordinating capacity for that purpose. Ryan, I think, sort of undersold the role that an organization like CareerWise can play in supporting small and medium-sized enterprises that are interested in getting involved in youth apprenticeship, because an intermediary like Ryan's organization or a state entity or whatever it may be in your community can take on a lot of the work that goes into startup, maintenance, the sort of ongoing improvement of the program itself. And so, the idea that we would create hundreds of thousands of little tiny single employee programs is certainly not an idea that I would promote, and I don't think anyone up here would. But we really very much need this partners. Trusted partners to come together to stand these up. And in terms of folks in the room who are in government, providing some capacity to organizations to actually then pass on the capacity that they're able to develop, investing in intermediaries, whether, again, those are public-private partnerships, at community colleges, at state agencies, within LEAs, local education agencies. There are lots of different ways that you can do it, but it's not going to work unless we make that investment, because, to your point, many, many, many of these companies just cannot invent their own program, nor will the quality of training that a million different programs decide to provide really help us get to the sort of vision for the economy that we have for the students who would enroll in these programs.
And I see Keith getting up, and I know we're out of time, but to complement Taylor's more comprehensive long-term answer, I want to give you a specific that you can sort of take away today. I highly encourage sort of experimentation, and there are organizations, fabulous organizations, to which you can go and hire one person or a couple of people to really just start to understand the landscape and to understand these talent pools to which you've not been exposed before, and really start to develop in your own organization and in your own mind, how might this work and what might success look like? And I know in my experience, you know, the pitch to senior management is not ever as compelling as introducing them to the student who is doing great things and they get to meet. So if you can have a summer intern from, you know, and I can give you a litany of names of tremendous organizations who do all the work for you, they pay for the training, they vet them, and they show up, and, you know, no commitment to hire, that could be your in.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to thank our panelists for a fascinating discussion.